Good morning, everybody. Just want to say hello first. My name is Larry Clark, and I am the Curriculum and Instructional Management Coordinator for Harnett County Schools. And I think that probably one of my biggest claims to fame is that I was the CIMC for the best RC in the state. Lynn Hartley, Bob, if we were going through monitoring again, I would have said you, but since we're done with that, it is going back to Lynn. But today I'm going to be talking to you about reporting performance data in Perkins 5. And I will say that, whenever we first started getting information about Perkins 5, and I'm going to turn my camera off, guys, because I know that it does make it lag. So I'm going to turn that off. So whenever we first started talking about Perkins 5 and how things were going to pan out with different concentrators, and we really didn't know what we were going to be looking at as far as reporting performance data, I started rattling around in my head, how am I going to give this information to the stakeholders in my district? And a lot of the things that you're going to see today are going to be local reports that I do for my folks here in district. And over the years, I had come up with a booklet that I would give my principals, superintendents, my director, that was comb bound and it looked really nice. And so, I started thinking about how I'm going to report. And today I'm going to talk about some of the things that I'm actually going to be doing locally. So the first thing is it's the 5S4, and I copied and pasted the definition in there. And I know in Misty's last section, she talked again about, how they were going to determine what would go into that 5S4 count. And I hate to be redundant where I'm talking about the same thing that she did earlier, but, for this, we need to make sure that we understand exactly what goes into that measure. And we know that it's going to be basically any local courses that you have, any courses that have a performance-based measure, or even a course that's going to have your basic 100-question test. So, and it's duplicated. So remember that, any participant that's in those are going to be in the denominator, and then numerator is the ones who actually met proficiency for that. So the first one is basically, I'm going to be talking about a couple of different years. And, the reason that I'm doing this is because the data that we've had or been getting over the past year and a half, 2 years, has been limited because of where we've been with COVID. So for 5S4 for 2021, it's basically going to be your traditional proficiency. We know that no course that had a PBM is in any status besides pilot. So even for 21-22, I'm going to be reporting traditional proficiency. And it was sort of interesting. I was talking to Bob Gant as I was sort of thinking about ways that I'm going to report this. And I believe that in my district, I'm actually going to be reporting things two different ways, which, could get a little confusing for folks, but I just want to be sure that I'm giving cover to my teachers. And a lot of times whenever I do my reporting, if I have teachers that are good teachers that may not have the greatest proficiency, I make sure to give more information to principals, superintendents, or whoever's looking at the data to be sure that they know that, even though their proficiency may not be great, it may be better than what our region or our state is doing. So in my past iterations of my reports that I've been giving to my folks, I always put absences in as a negative test result. And, that way I make sure to hold teachers accountable for getting students in to actually take our post assessments. And, in the old reporting, we know that we started with basically 95% of our total. and now it's 100%. So making sure that all students take our post assessments has become very important. And an absence is automatically going to be a negative result. Well, with COVID, we had unprecedented absences as far as testing is concerned during the fall and the spring. And, I say unprecedented. I don't know that we tested probably between 90 and 92% of our total student body. But what I didn't want to have happen is for my teachers to be hurt because of students who just refused to actually come and take the test. Or, we had instances where some students just never even showed up to any of our online classes that we were doing in the fall or the spring. So as I go through this, and I'm going to call it the Bob Gant process, is I'm going to be reporting with absences and without absences. That way, principals can actually see how students that were physically in the class and actually took the post assessment, how they did on the post assessment percentage wise. So I'm going to show you sort of what my report is going to look like for one of my schools. And I did use my fall data for this. And if you've been in any of my sessions that I've done in the past years, you'll see that this is going to look really similar to some things that I've done in the past. And, again, with this proficiency, it is going to be very similar to what we've done in the past. So what we're looking at is Over Hills High School, their fall 2020 data. I didn't use spring because I even tested a student last week. So, we're still in the process of actually just trying to get all of that wrapped up for the semester. But what I've got is for any teacher that had a post assessment or a local measure, and for me, it was all post assessments. I actually figured out what their proficiency was for every class that they had, and then I broke it down in a pivot table basically to determine what their teacher proficiency was in all of their courses. Now, I know that the 5S1 proficiency report in the NCCTE admin has definitely changed. And Missy, I appreciate that. That's something that, once I saw that, I was like, wow, that's really cool. Now, I'm sort of a control freak. I still love my spreadsheets, and I like to be able to manipulate the data on my own and to run my own pivot tables to get information from the raw data itself. So what I did, though, I looked at some of the percentages for proficiency from that 5S1 proficiency report in NCCTE admin. And for the most part, they were either exactly the same or really, really close. And, again, if I know where my data came from, I feel better about the number that I'm giving to folks. So, this is exactly what I do in my district. Now, one thing that I do add is the district proficiency for that course. And I'll tell you that what I do in this case is I pull that from the proficiency report in NCCTE admin, and I make sure to pull it over from another document in VLOOKUP so that I can put those district proficiencies, and then I actually get the region proficiency and the state proficiencies. So that my principals can actually look at what their teachers are doing against the rest of the state. And, this is an example that I used for several years that technically doesn't work now, but I have a teacher in my district that teaches metals manufacturing, and his proficiency level was typically between 70–75% every year. And, at some point his principal started asking, why is he so low? Why can't he get up in the 80s and 90s? And what I was able to do is basically show him that even though this teacher didn't have a great proficiency, the state proficiency for that course was 30 or 40%. So, in reality, that teacher was actually a superstar and had done really, really well, and was something that we should look at as a positive thing, because I knew that, he had done well for that. So this is what I'm going to be reporting to my principals, superintendents, and my director for this year. And this is what my overall report for that's going to look like. So that's the first one. Now, the next thing is going to be PBMs. So we know that the PBM is going to continue in pilot status for 21-22. For 2021, I'm not reporting those locally. And I'm going to admit that we did them poorly in my district this year. And I'll say that it was because of, the way that we were remote. Teachers really had a hard time with some of the hands-on things that are going to be required in the PBMs. I did ask for information from teachers, but it was bad. It was not good, and it's not something that I'm going to be reporting locally. And again, my reason is because I knew with the situation that we were in, it wasn't going to give us really good information. Now, for 2021, 2022, we are going to start the year off on fire with making sure that our teachers know exactly what it is that they're going to be doing with the PBM. My plan is to have some PLCs at the very beginning of the year and pull those folks in. My plan is to start with my ag teachers in the beginning of August, with them being 12 months. I'm going to pull them in so we can go ahead and start that planning process. And they are going to be my guinea pigs to, get all of my processes in order so that I know that we have it in place. And for the 2021-2022 school year, what I'm going to do is actually add that information into this report that I'm going to be giving to my principals. Now, the one disadvantage that I'm going to have, I don't know that we're going to have the regional and state proficiency information, because I don't know what information is going to be in NCCTE admin. With us not reporting it, I don't think it's going to be there for that 21-22 school year. So that will be left out, but I'll have district data that I'll be able to share with my folks and my stakeholders in my county, so that they can see how they're doing with respect to other folks in the district. And what I will do with this information, the principals get all of that proficiency information for their school. Our assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, our high school director, my director, and the superintendent get information from all schools so that they can see that. But in a minute, what you'll be able to see is that for the principals, I will give them district-wide information. And the reason I do that is because I like to, my folks are competitive. I have 4 comprehensive high schools in the district, and they love to be the top dog, and they each want to do better than the other schools. And so whenever I report that information to them as a whole, it actually creates some rivalry among principals that can help me motivate my teachers to do exactly what I want them to do. All right. So with PBMs, that's kind of how I'm going to do it. So the next thing that I'm going to be reporting, and this is going to be a little different, and this kind of works into Perkins 5. I'm going to be giving principals, stakeholders, superintendents, the number of concentrators by grade level in each school. And, my thought process behind this was the first meeting that I went to as we started talking about Perkins 5. The very first thing that was talked about was the definition of a concentrator and how it had changed. And when you look at Perkins 5 legislation, one of the required components of it had to do with concentrators and whether they were they got a credential if they were there were 3 of them, and that's the one we actually went with. And as we were looking at going into Perkins 5, I was a cheerleader in the background for that credential being the one that we went with, because I knew that we had a lot of credentials in Harnett County. But I'll kind of talk about that in just a minute, because I thought we were going to have a really good percentage, but I was very fooled on that one. So again, I'm going to be working on, I'm going to use the concentrator report that we just validated, and that report I'm going to pull numbers from in order to show principals how many concentrators they have in the school. I'll tell you that at one of my high schools, the principal absolutely looked at me and my director and asked, what do concentrators get for me? And, it was one of those things that I was sort of taken aback with, wow, we need concentrators. That's a big thing for us. And why can't you see that, being a concentrator is a good thing? You've got students who will stay in school longer. They graduate at a higher rate. It gives them employability skills. And that was one of those things that I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to figure out a way to show that your school is not a big concentrator school. And this is one of the things that I'm actually going to do, is report those concentrators. And also, when you start thinking about the concentrators, I don't know if you know it or not, but on the newest report card, it's going to show the number of concentrators and the number of credentials at each high school. So, again, this is a very public-facing document that is going to show everyone in your community how you compare in concentrators with other schools. Now, again, this one is going to show concentrators as a duplication. I know in our 5S1 number, it's non-duplicated, but in this public-facing report card, it is showing duplicates. So in my reporting to principals and other folks in my district, I am going to be showing those concentrators as duplicates. So that is something that I'm going to do. And again, it goes back to, Perkins 5 absolutely looks at concentrators as a big thing. And so for me, I want concentrators. I want those level 2 courses that are going to, give students an extension of the curriculum so that they'll have more information for decision making as they move into the working world. So, I'm going to put an emphasis on that as we move forward. Okay, so our next one is credentials, and I talked about this briefly, but whenever we got our baseline number for our 5S1, I'm going to admit I was very embarrassed. I think we were at like 28% as a district, and this is after having thousands of credentials in our district and being top 10 for several years in a row. And, the percentage per student was very high on credentials, but at 28%, I had to really take a step back and think, okay, what are we doing wrong? I mean, I know that we're getting a lot of credentials, but where are we lacking? And, I think Emily Sue, we're going to sort of talk about this in the next session as well. But for me, I'm going to be reporting the number of credentials per school. This is something that I've done, every year, because we are big on credentials in Harnett County. And then I'm going to be giving principals the number and percentage of credentials per teachers. Now, in that, I'm going to be taking out any local or any credential that we don't support locally, meaning that, we just don't have funding for every credential. But I'm wanting to make sure that, for those that we do support locally, that principals know how students are doing in those classes. For the most part, I'll say that my teachers jumped on board with credentials several years ago, and when I bring something new to them, they are very understanding, and they are wanting to do the credentials for the most part. I have a couple of teachers that I have to bend some arms and cajole them to make sure that their students are actually getting the credentials. But I want principals and even folks at schools to know that I'm looking at those percentages, because we need to remember, if they're a concentrator, if they do not have a credential in one of the courses that are on their pathway, then they're not going to be a positive number. Now, again, it's a non-duplicated count for 5S1. So if they are a multi concentrator, as long as they have one credential in one of their concentrations, they're a positive number. So, just making sure that that's out there. And that's why the validation report for seniors was so important, because, if you had a student, and I think that the Foods 1 example was that was a very good one whenever we saw that, because let's say that they were a concentrator for Hort 1 and Hort 2, and also Food 1 and Foods 2, the likelihood of them getting a credential in Hort 1 and Hort 2 is pretty low. It's tough to get we don't do the pest applicator credential, in the young professional. I'm not sure if that one's still on there, but we don't have any students in our district right now who are getting a Hort credential. So, that would definitely be a negative for us. But if they were a concentrator in Food 1 and Food 2, and they had gotten the food handler certification, but they were not showing on that validation report as a concentrator in that area, then that could be bad for us. So, making sure that all of their possible pathways are on that validation is going to be really important for that 5S1. Again, mainly for, did they get a credential there? Now, for 2021, 2022, I am going to add another report that shows which students got the tethered credential, like all credentials within NCCER. So in my district with 4 comprehensive high schools, I actually have 10 teachers who teach a trade for NCCER. And, that I will admit is our biggest area that we get credentials in. And, with core construction, I may have 500 or 600 kids in the district who actually take core construction. The first thing that we do is we get them their OSHA certification, and then they start working on the other 8 individual modules inside of NCCER. So, I want to report to principals how many of those students are getting that tethered credential, or all of them within the individual named credential like NCCER. So that is definitely one that I'm going to be adding for next year. All right. So, and this is what some of those are actually going to look like. And the numbers on the screen are our total credentials for the year for our high schools. So, I'll tell you that we had a new CDC at Western Harnett High School that burned it up, making sure that she had all of the credentials, the artifacts, and everything that she needed in order to put the stuff in NCCTE admin. I've got some work to do with the other 3 schools as we get back from summer break. As I looked into their artifacts, I definitely was not real happy with some of the stuff that they had done. So, we are going to be making sure that everything is in place the way that it should be moving forward. But again, this is information that each high school would get as far as the number of credentials that they have. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see that it's going to show the number of credentials that they had for each individual credential. Now, this wasn't all of them. I took a screenshot of some of the ones that we did, but this will sort of give you a picture into how we're trying to work on our 5S1. We are having all of our Food and Nutrition 1 students take the food handler certification through ServSafe. It is a online certification that's about $15 per student. And, you know, it is definitely one of those that is achievable by students. We had a lot of kids that were going through Foods 1 and Foods 2 that were not getting the Food Protection Manager certification. And you'll notice that we really had very few students who achieved that this year. And what we're hoping is that we'll be able to leverage the information that they learned in that food handler certification in order to be able to actually get a baseline of information so that whenever they do the Food Protection Manager in Food and Nutrition 2 or Culinary Arts 1, they'll have a better chance of passing that. Now, you know, I think that the food handler certification is one that they could take into industry and potentially bolster their resume so that they'll be able to show that, you know, they have some certification, but we know that that Food Protection Manager is the industry gold standard. And so we do want students to be able to get that Food Protection Manager as we move forward. But again, this is going to give the total number of credentials that our schools have done. And then on the bottom left, this is going to be a report that's going to go to individual principals to show the percentage of the actual credential that their teachers have done in their building. So that, again, we could, if we have some folks who aren't doing a really good job with this, it gives me talking points in order to be able to, you know, help principals understand what this is going to give us and why we need these. And I know that if I can get these underlying credentials for kids who are going to eventually become concentrators, it's definitely going to help that 5S1 number. Now, it's hard to, it may be small, but in the actual bottom left-hand corner report, one of the things that you would see is that our teachers did not get very many NCCER certifications this year. And I think that, you know, we only had a handful of those. And again, it was because of the lack of being face-to-face with kids. You know, we also missed out on a lot of fire certifications. We have 2 fire programs in the district. And I think that we may have gotten maybe 5 or 10 total at one school this year. And again, it's just because of where we were at. So, you know, as I give this report to my principals, one of the things that I'm going to be talking about is, you know, the understanding of where we've been for the past year and a half, and that, you know, I know that these things will get better as we move into a more normalized situation with students in classes, so that we can actually get the certifications and credentials that are available to them. You know, I believe that if you're going to bolster your 5S1 number, you're going to have to find ways to pay for credentials and certifications for students. You know, I think that budgeting is going to be really difficult for that, because, you know, you really have to start thinking about, all right, where am I going to be spending my money to help that actual number for those concentrators? But, you know, I know that OSHA certification is not extremely expensive, and it could possibly go for several different areas, you know. And if you'll notice on the screen, we do have OSHA certifications for some of our kids that are in Ag Mech. And what we did is we actually worked on getting our Ag Mech 2 student certifications in OSHA, because we knew that they were going to be leaving as concentrators, and we needed for them to have some credentials, some certification in order to help that 5S1 number. So, you know, I think that in order to be sure that you're helping that bottom line 5S1 number, you've got to sort of find the low-hanging fruit. What are certifications that students can actually get that are achievable by the masses? And, you know, with your food handler certification, not really expensive, and is definitely one that you can get in high numbers. I think about 90% of the kids in our district who started our food handler certification actually got the certification, and then OSHA. So those could be two that will help in multiple. I mean, the OSHA in multiple places. And one thing I was really proud of, I know David Barber's probably not on the line, but we actually had 4 kids that got drone certification this year. So, you know, that one again is a tough one. And we implemented drone technology in 2 of our schools. And, you know, one, we didn't get any certifications, but we did get 4 at Harnett Central High School. So, you know, shout out to Harnett Central High School. I was really happy with them and how they did in that. So I'm ending really early, Misty. I'm sorry. I thought I had more to talk about than that. As we continue going through our information, or, you know, I feel like this reporting in Perkins 5 could potentially change as I go through this. So, you know, I may really change some of the things that I do in order to give more information to my principals. But, you know, that's kind of what I'm planning on doing. Again, this is Larry. This is the Larry show. This isn't something that, you know, is coming from DPI. I would encourage you to think outside of the box and figure ways to report your stuff so that, you know, you can, you know, one thing that I'll be very careful and make sure that you don't discourage teachers, because, you know, if they see horrible numbers without some context, then, you know, we've got to be very careful with that, because I try not to let my teachers get beat up. I want to protect them as much as possible. If somebody's going to do the beating, I want it to be me. You know, so that's kind of where I'm at. So questions, comments, suggestions. Thanks, Madeline. Misty, you're too nice. Lee, miss you, Lee. Hadn't seen you in about 7 years.
Larry, this has been great information, and we appreciate you sharing so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Tracy, congratulations on Lee County. We'll see you soon. Thanks, Melinda. Funny thing is, the last time I presented, I ended up getting tested positive for COVID the next day. So I'm hoping for a better one this time. All right,
Thank
guys.
you, Larry. We appreciate you and appreciate the good stuff that you always bring to us. So thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next session.
Absolutely. And there's my information, guys. If anybody needs anything, please contact me. I am more than willing to help. And Michelle, I have not forgotten you. I sort of got away from your email. Michelle Davis from Cumberland County. We can definitely talk. So, all right.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end so we can jump into the next session, but we'll see you there. Thank you.
Thank you.